This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, doctoral students, and everyone in between, cultural workers, and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Kojo Damptey, a musician and scholar who is completing doctoral studies in the School of Social Work at McMaster University. His musical work engages with transatlantic sound connections and political meaning, which draws from his academic research on Afrocentrism, indigenous African systems of knowledge, and decolonial theoretical frameworks. In this conversation, we discuss the relationship between study and musical practice, the political meaning of sound, and the significance of art for cultural and social liberation work. Good morning, Kojo. How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
Not too bad. It's, Monday, and like all Mondays in academia and this time of year that we're recording this mid-April, it's a really cruel, difficult time, but really been looking forward to this conversation. So really happy that you made the time and look forward to this. So thank you. And I also I'm also especially excited to have you on the podcast because you're one of these folks who's both working in study but also a practicing artist. And so to be able to talk to you as an artist where you can also draw on your studies, it's just a really important perspective to have. So thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
So let me get started. I want to ask you, and I'm, starting this as asking you as an artist, but feel free to also talk about its relationship to your own scholarly work. What drew you as an artist and scholar to work on Black life? And by that, I mean, what were those formative experiences, whether they're childhood, education, community, political kinds of experience that brought art and Black life together for you?
That's a deep question. I think it's everything. My whole life. I was born and raised in Ghana, Accra, West Africa. Went to boarding school at Achimota Secondary School, which was founded by the Gagisberg, a British person, colonial times. So my upbringing, my family, my dad, my parents, my grandparents, they all loved music. We would listen to Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. We would watch Black movies. But at the time, I knew about the transatlantic slave period. We studied it in school. We talked about the Songhai Empire, the Ghana Empire, all of those historical important moments. But at the time, I felt disconnected from it in a way that was like a remnant of the past, right? We weren't living the past and the present. So when I moved to Canada in 2001, it started unraveling that past is our present. In Hamilton, where I do my work and live, the Stewards, one of the Black churches here, Stewart Memorial, was part of the Underground Railroad. In St. Catharines, where Harriet Tubman supported, worked with Black community members, is also live and well. So you get to then map out and stitch together all of the different experiences. And so that is what has informed the art and music that I make, the scholarly work that I am involved in, and the community work that I do, and some of the other projects that I do here in Canada and back home in Ghana.
Yeah, I mean, let me follow up with that. I say this all the time, but it's really like my favorite part of this podcast is just hearing how people come to engage with Black life in various ways, whether as artists or activists or scholars or mixtures of those. And what you were talking about is so interesting because just that movement from Ghana to Canada, as it's already introducing all kinds of differences, obviously, but also it's interesting that you were saying, when you were in Ghana, you're also listening to Stevie Wonder, right? And so there's a kind of some continuity built into that. But I'm interested just in how that phrase Black life resonates for you, sort of between those two spaces, or maybe it's in those two spaces differently. I mean, there's always a question of diaspora and migration, right? About how is the meaning of something in one place different in another? But since this is a Black Studies podcast, and and the context that we're talking about this, I wonder how that phrase Black life resonates for you in the between those two spaces, but also back and forth.
Yeah, it's something that I had to work through. And I share this all the time. When I came to Canada, I didn't see myself as a Black person. I saw myself as a Ghanaian, an Akan person, someone from Akropong, someone from Cape Coast, because that's where my dad and mom respectfully come from, right? So that was just how I identified culturally, socially, nationally, all of the things that we talk about. But then when you come to Canada, all of those things disappear,
Mm-hmm.
right? Blackness becomes the essence, right? And so at least for me, I had to come to an understanding of what that actually means, right? Is it skin color? Is it culture? Is it a social manifestation? Is it an ontological thing that we have to unravel? So those are the things that has led me to understand what is Black life. And all of the guests that you've had on the podcast, Ronaldo, Charlene, and others have all spoken to how Blackness is not it's not a monolith.
Mm-hmm.
There's a multiplicity of understanding of Blackness, and it comes in different ways. So we have to understand it, and we have to understand it because obviously the creation of Blackness stems from modernity. And I think Charlene said it on the podcast, right? Black life is the study and understanding of modernity.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean, right? As someone that moved from Ghana to Canada, that means something. For a Black person or a person of African descent that has lived their entire life in Canada, that means something, right? For a person of African descent living in El Salvador, Brazil, China, in Europe, those mean different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about Black life, is unraveling what those meanings are, and how do we kind of stitch them into a collective that ensures that we end the threat of global anti-Blackness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that I think has really emerged, I mean, you put it really nicely, I think there, the multiplicity question, even just what we mean by that word multiplicity in terms of thinking about Blackness and Black life is such an interesting issue, to contemplate. And as you said, in all of these different geographies. And I was thinking about this podcast that came out when you and I are recording this last Friday, but it's April 11th with Kesawa John, who works on Black British studies and Black British history, and she was talking about just this idea of Black British is such a new phenomenon. It actually it postdates her own childhood, right? And that really multiple generations living in England were still talking about themselves as West Indian or African, right? And so sort of how these identities form that actually claim a place or claim a hyphen, right, of Black Britain, right? Black Canadian, Black American, Black Salvadoran. I mean, these formations are so interesting because they're taking, as you were talking about, taking place simultaneously with migration.
Yeah.
That moves within the space of anti-Blackness, but that the Black and anti-Blackness has its own story that I think little by little this podcast is like unlocking in really important ways. I mean, lots of scholars do it as well, but yeah, it's good to hear you speak to it. Yeah. So let me ask you about your artistic practice as a musician. I'm interested in how that practice relates to study. Is study just something that you do and then you have your artistic practice, or is your artistic practice formed by study? And I mean study broadly. I mean, obviously, you're a doctoral candidate, and so that's a formal sense of study. But even other forms of study, how do you think in that sort of, I guess you could say, a sort of Black studies, Black cultural context, the role of the various forms of study in your musical practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're the same. They're literally the same for me. I think it was Nina Simone who once said, the value of an artist is to tell the stories of the times. And I'm paraphrasing here, but that estimation has literally been my foundational understanding of what my art is like, and what the study is, because those two should inform each other. And I think this is some of the discussions that has also happened on the podcast around like the formation of Black studies, right? Is it an intellectual endeavor, or is it an activist endeavor? Well, what we've seen and heard and experienced is that both go hand in hand. They inform each other. Fred Hampton, if your theory is not informing praxis, then bleep.
Yeah.
Right. So I think for me, the study and the art go hand in hand. All the albums that I've recorded speak to some level of Black life globally, and also it speaks to the decolonial thinking. This goes back to this idea of a pluriversality and a multiplicity of understandings. We see that here, actually, in Canada, where Indigenous genocide has taken place, right? So how do we talk about that in relation to Black life? How do we talk about that in relation to Black liberation? So I think for me, weaving all of that in my music and my art is very, very important. My second album, Giants, Stories of Existence, Resilience, and Resistance, was paying homage to Annabel Cuano, a decolonial thinker, was paying homage to Black feminists, Latinx feminists, and Pan-African leaders and Black leaders, right? So I think it's also kind of wrapped up in the Black radical tradition of music, as I would put it, right? You have Fela Kuti, Marvin Gaye, Nina Simone. You have all the jazz greats that were all, right, thinking through Black life through music and art. And so that is how I see the two working together in equilibrium.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that, how do you where do you see study manifesting itself in your music? Is it in the formation of sound, or is it largely in terms of lyrics and stories that you want to tell through lyrics?
It's mainly through the lyrics and the story. Um, my third album, it was called Radical Thoughts, and it was obviously paying tribute to Cedric Robinson's Black Radical, right? Where has Black radical thinking brought us to? And so some of the lyrics are really uh, meant to share the stories and also um, think think about what kind of future we create, even when we're experiencing the violence and the resistance and the existence and all the things that come with being Black.
So this, I mean, maybe you've already given an answer to this, but I'll ask it. You know, maybe you want to embellish or expand. But you know, what do you think your work as a musical artist says about Black life? Like, what's its? What do you think? You know, maybe this is multiple things, but what do you think your musical practice is trying to say about blackness, Black life, Black politics?
I think what it's trying to say is trying to um, accentuate abolition thinking.
Mm.
It's trying to bring to life liberation understandings. Um, you know, uh, I was performing once in Ottawa at a social justice event. It's called the People's Social Forum. And after performing a song, uh, one person came up to me and was like, and I would say a senior citizen, and they were like, "You sound like Gil Scott Heron," uh, and I mentioned that to say, you know, when she said that, obviously I was happy, but what it means that there's a connection, you
Mm-hmm.
know, where Joe Scott Harris says the revolution will not be televised, right? And that's what he's remembered for. If someone now listens to my music and says, um, I remind them of Gil Scott Heron, then that is exactly what my music is about. It's about, you know, animating those thoughts and that drive for liberation. The same way that, you know, 600 years we had enslavement. There were folks that spoke and resisted the Haitian Revolution, the Maroons, and others. They all used music in some form.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a hope that the unraveling of modernity will happen, but we have to speak it into being, and I think that's where music and art play a critical role.
Yeah, I love that. I was curious what you were going to say when she said Gil Scott Heron. I was like, that's not a bad that's not a bad resonance. I'm sure that was a good moment. Um, in some ways, your comment on Gil Scott Heron, you know, is already a comment on this. But I wanted to ask, like, you know, because art, like study, like any kind of tradition, right, has a relationship to its past, present, but also future. And I'm interested to hear how you think of your musical practice in relation to the history and future of Black art. And, you know, take your geography as you like, you know, in Canada, in the United States, broadly across the diaspora, or even in terms of stories of migration. You know, how do you see your musical practice in the history of Black art? And also to the future.
Yeah, I think it's very important, and maybe for me, I do that aesthetically through the genre, right? So whether it's Afrobeat, high life, reggae, that is probably the transnational or Black internationalist view of music, because obviously, the likes of Fela Kuti, Mariam Makiba, Osibisa, those really had an influence on my music career. And in fact, I happened to open for Fela Kuti's son, Femi Kuti.
Oh, wow.
Yes, a while back. So I think for me, I try to make those connections. I think about the role hip hop has played in these geographies across time and across movement, and also has changed culture. So I think aesthetically or genre wise, that's where I make those connections in terms of the different genres that are connected to Black life, and that has also changed the trajectory of world culture.
Mm-hmm. So, just to sort of continue with that theme and thinking in this way, maybe another way of revisiting the past and future of thinking about Black musical art and your practice. What do you think that Black musical forms have done well historically, and what do you think they've not done particularly well? And it's forms, but also practices, whether you want to think of those in terms of culture or politics and so forth.
Yeah, I think what has it done well? I would say let's take jazz and hip hop. Okay, these are genres of music that now everyone across the world plays, right?
Yeah.
And if we're to think of it like um, a mode of knowledge or a way of being or a way of knowing that is shared without any form of ownership, as opposed to modernity,
Yeah.
which commodifies and owns people and catalogs people, right? On the other hand, when you look at hip hop, it's for everyone, right? When you look at jazz, everyone plays it. I'm reminded of this month is April. April 4th is what we call in the hip hop scene 404 Day, which is the 20th anniversary of a little instrument called the SP404. And hip hop has used that instrument. And on this day, you see many hip hop producers and music makers traveling to Japan and across the world, hosting events, and they're just enjoying hip hop culture, right? So to me, I think that is the beauty of music in terms of, or Black music, if I were to be specific, in terms of its sharing and its knowing and allowing other people to also express themselves in it. I think about Afrobeat, same thing, right? Now you have many folks listening to Burna Boy. There's a Ghanaian artist by the name of Manifest whose music has also been able to reach many people. So I think that's what Black African music has done well in terms of creating a community and changing the ways in which social issues are talked about and how to address them. The not so well, I think, on a mass appeal, we see the depoliticization of art. We see how art has been so commodified that now it is not a vehicle for telling the times, as Nina Simone would put it, right? So what does that mean? That means that now artists are more concerned with their commodification as opposed to the transformation, right? So those are the things that I would say we haven't done so well. Um, and it also speaks to um, the what is art and what is art supposed to do, right? If it's supposed to be used to get rich, then what does that say? If it's supposed to build community, what does that say? So I think for me, these are the things that I am thinking about. The other thing I'll add to is that I think we also need to find ways to support art in a non-commodified way, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that artists need to survive, and how do we build collectives that ensure that um, artists, whether it's music, visual, movies, how can we make uh, um, all of that survive? Because we also know that sometimes great art is also done when you have the time to really be one in nature, be in community, socially, physically, psychologically. That's where you're able to really be in tune. So to me, I think we haven't supported um, art collectively in a way that we would support um, other vocations or other ways of telling our story. So I think those are the things that I am thinking about. I also would add that, globally, when we think about Black artists uh, that are really trying to use their art for social change, I think that number has been greatly reduced.
Yeah.
Uh, so uh, it begs a big challenge of, you know, how do we really address that?
Yeah, look, I'm sure you've heard in Canada about our far right government here in the United States. Trying to annex Canada or something. But well, I mean, I've been thinking about this really for the last, joking aside, for the last 10 or so years, of seeing this like rise of the far right and really thinking about, you mentioned Nina Simone a few times, thinking about Nina Simone, Marvin Gaye, and others for whom the crises of their moment, Gil Scott-Heron, of course, um, the crises of their moment required something of them as musicians. And I've wondered, like, are we just going to go through this period, we meaning the United States, this period of extreme right-wing politics and not see a musical counterpoint to that, musical rallying against this moment. And I think that's true. As you say, the intensification of the commodification of music is so overwhelming, and the benefits of allowing yourself to be commodified and playing that, the benefits are you become a billionaire. I mean, it's the financial incentive is massive. Now, I never understand why the financial incentive supersedes the human, but that would be a mystery for global capitalism. I don't know how else to put it. But also when you talk about commodification and also the beauty of art, right, as you said, sort of hip hop and the 404, anniversary, or just, playing and playing with it. I think play is like, so important. As you said, people finding ways to express themselves in this, what was a North American art form, now global art form. There's that play, and then there's commodification. But there's also, another form of commodification. I wonder, if you have any thoughts on this, that people worry a lot about, which is the commodification of these art forms that allow them to basically be taken. Here for, many years, it just has gone under the phrase cultural appropriation, which is so different than the play you were talking about, right? Which is artists finding ways to play with the expressions that they share between each other. But that seems to also be a feature of commodification to the possession of art rather than the openness to contact. But of course, openness to contact is also those moments of cultural theft.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is where, if I can get a little Black Studies ish, is that I think that's why our understanding of racial capitalism is very important, right? Because the taking and the ownership is the process of modernity,
Yes.
right? The Catherine McKittrick and Ronaldo Walcott talk about this, right? Blackness is presence and absence, right? It's when we equate it to the commodification of art, the presence is there, right? The hip hop, the jazz, the Afrobeat is present, but then to inoculate its effectiveness to unravel modernity, it has to be taken, and it has to be commodified, and it has to be commercialized, and it has to be sold, so that now the preciseness and the conciseness of modernity's dangers are not now told in the artistic form, are not now used to bring community together, because we know the neoliberal order tries to individualize things, so that now we're not concerned about the collective, but we're concerned about individual success, right? So these are the dangers of the taking and the commodification and the commercialization. So this speaks back to, even for us that, steady Black life, or adjacent to Black life in some form, how can we think through ways of collectively supporting artists so that taking is minimized, mitigated, and we are enhancing the sharing and the collective. My supervisor, Dr. Emil Joseph, always says, look at what is in front of you and think collectively and do collectively. Because when you do that, then now we are really unsettling the modes of modernity that have taken over our lives.
I love that. I mean, artists against modernity or artists outside modernity is just exactly what we need. And it's interesting to hear you talk about this. I'm going to, this would be a great podcast to be able to use in class when I talk about this, because, one of the things, I love to talk about modernity. So whenever somebody talks, mentions that, I'm like, yes, this is my theoretical space. But, how do you think, practice, Blackness against modernity? And my students, they always want to ask, because they're like, how do we do this? Because they don't like it, for all those reasons you've outlined really well in this conversation, that Blackness is sort of entrapped in modernity in these ways and commodification. And I say, Dizzy Gillespie in Cuba, that's art against modernity. It's just, a group of musical geniuses sitting down, in the Havana humidity, and just making something really special that, later gets recorded and sold and toured and all of that. But in that moment, there's something else happening. Now, how do we think from these spaces? As you're talking about, like, how do we support art in those spaces that, whatever it's maybe later commodification or, partial commodification, still has that resistance, still has, in that sense, that radicalism that is possible when maybe it's that movement, between, say the U.S. and the Caribbean, the Caribbean and West Africa, rather than always through some executive in Los Angeles or New York City.
Yeah, and I mean, uh, I think these questions are very important because yes, I know your country is under a huge threat, but I would argue that we are all under that threat. Here in Canada, we have an election, and there's a possibility that we might have a far right prime minister.
Don't do it. It's
Uh,
bad. I don't know what else to say. Shit.
yeah, well, I would. I think one of and this is the reason why I think a podcast like this is very important because for far too long, um the interventions under Black studies by various Black thinkers, activists, musicians, the list goes on and on, have have given us the visions of what we are experiencing now, right? I think about Ruth Wilson, organized abandonment.
Mm,
That is what we are literally living in right now,
yep.
where the state abandons people and polices surveils them and then says, oh, the problem is us. And then we get to fight amongst us as to whether, our property taxes are being spent properly, whether taxes are being used appropriately. And these are distractions because at the center of it all is that we need to address white supremacy, we need to address modernity. So I would say we are all in this, and the more we start making the connections, and building collective ways of thinking and sharing this knowledge so that people know, the better it is for all of us.
I completely agree. Thank you for that. That's both needed and important and really timeless. Certainly timeless since the birth of global empire. The way we actually, the global empire gets turned on inside onto itself in these far right moments, and ask something more of us. I mean, I think to, be intro podcast about it, there was a great conversation I had with G. Omar and Anthony Smith, who run the abolition school in Philadelphia. And they were talking at the time we were talking, right at the moment of the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And they said, you know, so many people say that they feel isolated in this moment, sort of alone and sort of frightened. And they said, but the people who don't feel like that are the people who have been working on community building and community organization, where you already have your people. And you already have, it might just be a couple of, 2x4s or whatever, but you have the beginnings of the building of something different. And so, and I think art and music and conversation, all of these elements get us back to that. So thank you for that. That's the podcast's worth it for a million reasons, but for that reminder alone, I appreciate it. And let me ask then, maybe this is your answer to this last question I have for you, which is, what's the one issue or the one question you'd like to see artists and critics ask?
Ooh.
So you're in charge of all of us for just this next few minutes.
Yeah. How to end imperialism? That's it. That's the question. How do we end imperialism? How do we build collective cultures? Because it's there is a lot happening that requires immediate attention. I think in your previous comments, a lot of Black thinkers, artists, and scholars and cultural workers have said we've been living fascism since the modern, right?
Mhm.
So all the other people that are now seeing that fascism. It's time to come over and see how we can build a global liberation movement, one that is not monolithic, but that one that is pluriversal. And I think it's a huge challenge. It's easy to say it, but then it's hard to do, right?
Yeah.
Because it feels like, if I have to tackle this problem, what about that? What about that? What about that? What about that? But the lesson for music is, when you have a band, there are five people playing five different instruments that have to play the same thing and
Hmm.
be in the same key.
Yeah.
Right? And even when one is improvising, the others are still making sure they're still on beat and they're still in key. And I think that is the lesson that music has for for Black life. How do we improvise and play as a band and still be in the same key so that we are making beautiful music?
I love that. There's so much in that. I don't even want to say sort of metaphor or parallel because it's actually the enactment of these things. Because I mean, at the heart, not at the heart, but in the sort of backdrop of that is, it's not as if musicians aren't known for their ego and their particular personal needs, but are able nevertheless to play together, and that's for me, it's always kind of a mystery. How did these, like a Miles Davis, how do they manage to have such stunning bands? Well, it's a commitment to exactly what you're talking about, the end of a certain kind of individualism and imagination and practice of something new. So, what a wonderful place to end. This has been a great conversation, Kojo. I'm really happy that you made the time and to get your voice on the podcast. So, thank you so much. I really look forward to this getting in people's ears. I think there's so much to think about.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
You
All
too.
right. Bye bye.